Hi, I'm Amy and this is Grace and welcome to Bake with Kids. Today we're going to be making crepes or crepes. However you pronounce it, they taste the same. The recipe can always be found in this post, or if you go to our webpage, kingarthurflour.com, you're going to search for Parisian Street Vendor Crepes. It's a long name for a short recipe. Let's take this opportunity as we begin to review what we do when we get ready to bake. One thing that we wanted to accomplish with the Bake with Kids videos is just to give you some basic baking skills so that whatever it is that you make, you're going to be as successful as you can. So when you're getting ready to prepare any kind of food, you're going to find your recipe first and you're going to read it through thoroughly at least twice. This is the formula for your experiment. It's going to tell you the ingredients you need, the tools you need, and all the steps that you need to make whatever it is that you're going to be cooking. So one thing you're going to notice in this recipe is after we make our batter, we need to let it sit for at least an hour before we cook our crepes. So that's something that you would want to know before you get started. So we have our recipe, we've read it carefully, we wash our hands, we take out and put out all of our tools, our ingredients, and the equipment we're going to need. Pull your hair back so it doesn't fall into your bread dough. Put on an apron or a clean shirt. As you go throughout the day, just dust and hair and things kind of collect on our clothes, and we don't want to have any of that in our food. You're going to take off your watches, any rings you have, and then you're going to wash your hands again before you begin. So just getting yourself set up and ready is going to be a great way to start. All right? So our crepe recipe, crepes are a favorite in our house. We have made these for a long time, and I think it might be one of the first things that you actually cooked yourself on the stove. Would you say?
Yeah.
Probably. All right. So she's going to actually be the one who's going to be making the crepes later. We have some really simple ingredients. We're going to be using 2 cups of all-purpose flour. You can use white whole wheat, or you can do half and half. We're going to do just half a teaspoon of salt, 1.5 cups of milk, 4 large eggs, and then 1/4 cup of melted butter. Grace is going to do the dry ingredients in one bowl. I'm going to do the wet ingredients in the other bowl, and then we're going to combine them. So for Grace's 2 cups of flour, for a King Arthur cup of flour, that is 4¼ ounces. So she's going to fluff, sprinkle, and sweep to get an accurate measurement. And she's going to go ahead and put that in there with the salt. Over here, 2 cups please, thank you. Over here, I'm doing eggs and milk. My eggs and milk are lukewarm. They're at room temperature. We do that for a couple of reasons. One is when everything is the same temperature, it's just going to blend more easily. But also, we're going to be pouring melted butter into our batter. And if the milk was cold and the eggs were cold, our butter would solidify. All right, we want to keep it melted. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour this in here. I use whole milk. I think you could use skim milk too. All right, if you have not cracked eggs before, you want to take a flat surface, not the edge of your bowl, and you're going to tap and you're going to open it up. You can do this into an extra bowl so that you're sure that you haven't gotten any eggshells in there. I think you're going to enjoy making these because we're doing it on the top of the stove and we're not baking it. When it's warm weather out, you don't always want to, we're getting close to summer, you don't necessarily want to turn your oven on. All right, Grace, you are good. Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just take 2 of these. All right, we're going to mix these first before we put our butter in. You can use a hand mixer for this. Oh yes, please go ahead and put the salt in. Thank you. All right, I'm going to use a whisk. So watch what I do first. I'm going to take my whisk and I'm going to kind of poke down and I want to break my egg yolks a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to start my whisk very slow and small. I'm not going to like slosh it around because I don't want this to come out of the bowl. All right. So now I'm going to pour most of this in here. The recipe says to pour half because I read the recipe. And I'm going to mix this in. I'm going to take my whisk and I'm going to scrape the sides of my bowl. Make sure I'm getting it all. Now I'm going to pour the rest in. You know, be generous with yourself and make sure you give yourself a big enough bowl. If your bowl is too small and you start to mix things, everything's going to come out the sides of your bowl. So I'm just going to start to mix this. I'm not completely done yet. There's still little lumps, but I'm going to go ahead and pour in my melted butter. it. All right. I do find that when all of my ingredients are at room temperature, they just blend more easily. So you're gonna give it a good mix. You may have a few lumps left, but not very many at all. And that's it. That's all you need to do. So we are now going to cover this, and it's going to rest for at least an hour, but it can go overnight. When we made popovers a number of weeks ago, we let that batter rest as well. So what's happening during that rest is that the starch in the flour is absorbing the liquid, and and the starch is going to get nice and full of liquid. So your batter is actually going to thicken a little bit while it's resting. All right. So I'm going to cover this. We'll be back in just a moment. We're going to be set up to start to make our crepes. All right, so we're ready to cook our crepes. So the recipe calls for a 10-inch frying pan, and with a 10-inch frying pan, you would use 1/3 cup of batter per crepe. I have an 8-inch pan. If you're doing this for the first time, I think an 8-inch pan is a little bit easier because they're smaller, they're going to be easier to flip. So with an 8-inch pan, we are using 1/4 cup of batter. So we're going to put some melted butter. Grace is going to show you how to do this. We have our pan on medium. It might take a little bit to figure out the right temperature. Your first few are always test cases. So she's put her butter in. She's going to take a scoop of batter right in the middle, and she's going to turn it so it fills all the edges. And then she's gonna let it sit there, and we're gonna see that it's gonna cook. Just gonna make sure it's kind of loose on the ends. It's gonna cook most of the way through before she turns it over. Like I said, your first ones are gonna come out and they're not gonna look great. They're gonna taste great, but it takes a little while to get the knack of it. And like I said, it takes a while to get your pan at the right temperature. So you might start with your burner a little bit higher to get your pan heated up, and then as you're going, you might find that you turn your pan down. So once it's come together and it's all solid and it's mostly cooked all the way through, she's just gonna flip it for just a second. All right. You're the pro, so I'll let you take it off when you feel like it's ready. I think it's good. All right, so it's just a nice light brown. Go ahead and stack them up. Want to do another one? So we just have some melted butter here, but in between, when you hear that sizzle, I think it tells you it's the right temperature. If you didn't want to scoop it out like this, you could put it in a measuring cup with a spout so that you could pour it more easily. Perfect. All right, and we're just gonna let it sit for a moment, and let's show them how it's cooked mostly all the way through before we turn it over. And you're just gonna let it sit. So we have these like lined up on our plate. If you wanted to make these ahead of time, you can, and you can layer them between wax paper and actually take your stack, put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in the freezer, and you can keep them in there as well. You don't need to eat them hot. They're fine at room temperature. It would be great. And it's a fun activity. So, okay, ready? See, it's mostly, yeah, there you go. Perfect. See, it's just lightly brown.
It's okay if it gets folded over a little bit.
Absolutely, it does. I like to use this kind of spatula to turn it. It helps, I think because it's flexible enough to sort of get around and underneath. And again, with the smaller pan, I think it's just easier to flip them over that way. So while that is cooking, I want to show you this pan that I have over here. So, some of you may look at this and say, this is a silver dollar pancake pan. In our house, it is a Swedish pancake pan. So my mother-in-law is Swedish. Her family is from Sweden. You may keep going. And one of the first things she ever made for me were Swedish pancakes. So she has a pan like this, which I think belonged to her mother. And the Swedish pancake recipe is very much like a crepe recipe. I was looking at it and comparing it to our crepe recipe, and the ratios are very much the same. So I have my pan, and this is not the best burner, but I'm going to use it. So for these, I put my batter in a measuring cup, and I'm just going to fill them. So traditionally, you would eat these with lingonberry jam. She often also would make these for Christmas Eve for smorgasbord, and you would put smoked salmon, creme fraiche on it. How do you feel about Swedish pancakes, Grace?
They're very good, especially with jam.
Especially with jam. So I'm not really going to tip this too much the way Grace is, because I want them to kind of stay in their little pockets there. And in a moment, I'm just going to flip these over. How are you doing?
Good.
Great. So we did empanadas a few weeks ago, and we talked about how it's a really fun thing. Everyone can choose their filling for an empanada. Crepes are the same. This is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Any choice you want, all right? You can use, and we have some examples over here. While these are cooking, we have just put cinnamon sugar on these crepes, which are great. This we have filled with Nutella. Grace is gonna eat that in just a moment. Here are some of my little Swedish pancakes. We put some confectioner sugar on top. Here's one that just has berries on it. This one is a savory one for dinner. So I just filled it with some sauteed mushrooms and herbs, and I'm gonna roll it up. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna line those like rolls of crepes into a pan. I'm gonna put some shredded cheese on top and stick it under the broiler for just a moment, and that will be dinner. All right, so with my Swedish pancakes, I use a knife to turn them over. Oops. So in my house, my mother-in-law is called Mima, so these are Mima pancakes. If you're doing these for breakfast, they're great. It's a little bit of a labor of love because by the time you have done one round, whoever had the round before has eaten them and they're waiting for the next round. So, and we usually have these. I think we mostly do raspberry jam with these for breakfast.
Strawberry jam.
Yeah. And so you just take them off like that. And that's it. I hope that you give this recipe a try. I hope you give crepes a try. Again, it was a really simple recipe. It was easy to make. We didn't have a lot of tools that we needed. This is a little bit special, but you don't have to have this. It's just fun if you do. So as Grace just reminded me, again, you can freeze these. You can make a whole lot, eat a few, and then finish them off later. Anything else that we're forgetting?
Thinning batter.
Oh, yes. We found out when we took our batter out, it was really just a little bit too thick. So I just took a little bit of milk and just mixed it in so it was a little bit thinner and easier to pour. And I think that's everything, right? Yeah. All right, we have a lot of crepes to eat. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.